guys, welcome back to my channel. Today is going to be a complete beginner's guide to reading fantasy, getting into it, my tips and tricks, and also just some of my best recommendations that I can give you. That is going to include my YA recommendations all the way through to adult, going from like the easiest to begin with and then leading into some more of like the more complex fantasy, I would say. And then at the end, I think I may throw in, depending on how much time I've spent talking about my favorite books, I'll go into the books I have on my TBR. So if you guys have actually already read them, you can let me know which ones to start next based off the taste that I've got sitting next to me. Getting into fantasy has been a recent thing for me as well. I did read my first ever real fantasy series, which obviously was ACOTAR, maybe back in 2021. Before that, I was only reading romance. I loved it. I got into it. I started reading a few other series from there, and then I slowly just faded off again and I got back into my romance books. So I was straight romance, and I've slowly been diversifying my genres at this probably the last maybe 4 to 6 months. I think what I want most out of this is to try and get someone who's into romance, possibly, or even other genres, getting into fantasy and understanding why I love it so much, which for me, the reason I love fantasy is sometimes when you're just so in your head and you want to escape everything, fantasy is the genre for that. As much as I love a good romance book, a fantasy book, you're quite literally leaving this current world, which is usually what you read romance books about, and in a fantasy book you can go somewhere completely different life, completely different rules, completely different creatures. Everything about it is so different, and that's what makes it so special to me, and I love it so much for the fact that it's so out of this world, like quite literally out of this world, and I love it. So yes, this video is going to be all my tips and tricks and all of my best recommendations. If you do want to skip the tips and tricks, I will put up on the screen the time frame to skip to, and you can just jump through to there and miss all of that advice if you're just here for the recommendations. Yeah, let's jump into it. I'm sorry if the lighting as well keeps changing. I am using a natural lighting and the clouds keep coming and going, so I'm very sorry. I was a bit nervous about creating this video just because I don't have the best knowledge, I would say, for completely like knowing everything that there is to know about fantasy, because there is so much to learn. But I feel maybe I am in a good position to give some advice for beginners, because technically I am a beginner and maybe what's worked for me may work for someone else. But I just want to point out that I in no means am giving 100% correct advice or 100% correct information. I am still learning myself. So if I do give out some wrong information, I apologize. After this video, if I have needed to correct myself in any way, I'll put up on the screen what the correct thing was to say or what I meant by that. And yeah, if you are looking for more expert advice, there are so many creators out there. I will put a couple on the screen that have given me some good recommendations as a beginner, as well as also if you're looking for some more complex high fantasy recommendations, they'll definitely be able to put you in the right direction. Now, before I start, I do want to disclaim all of the fantasy books that I will be recommending today will have romance. I am so sorry, but there is no way in hell I can read a book without romance. I am a romance girly at heart, forever and ever. Like, if it doesn't have romance, I don't have anything to grasp. Like, I need that sprinkle of romance just in there, because that is gonna keep me going. I'm not gonna lie. Unless I truly love every single character, which normally in like the larger fantasy series, I end up being that way and I am reading just for the characters. To get me in and to get me involved, I will need that sparkle of romance, that little bit of hope, the forbiddenness, the enemies to lovers, the toxicity of knowing that she is about to go against her kingdom and go for the man that she is not meant to go for. That's the kind of love I'm looking for. Let's go through some general information about fantasy and what that can mean as a reader, and just understanding some information of what could be involved in those sorts of books. Personally, going from a romance book into fantasy, there are so many things that you need to learn, such as the politics. There is new laws that you're going to have. There are going to be new creatures. There's going to be world building. And sometimes there's even a new language that we need to learn. There are also different types of fantasy books. So we do have dark fantasy, we have historical fantasy, urban fantasy, we have high stakes fantasy, we have a low stakes fantasy, we have fairy tale fantasy, contemporary fantasy, there is magical realism fantasy, and also paranormal fantasy. There's So many, I didn't even get through half of them. There are just slight differences between them. At the core of it, what makes it fantasy is the world building, the politics, the wars, and the language and the creatures, that they are in some way different. And that can be whether there is fae involved, there is wolves, vampires, any sort of out of this normal world creature. Just listing all of those things, it does seem very daunting to start with because there is just so much information, and there is so much information that is out there for you to learn about it. So I do recommend the best place to start when getting involved with fantasy is a YA fantasy. I deeply apologize about the terrible lighting. It's a common occurrence in all my videos, so welcome to Tasha's videos. Yeah, so I was saying YA is definitely the best place to start, obviously being that it is made for young adult, young readers to understand in a simple way. My first official tip would be to definitely choose a trope that resonates with you in your current reading, whether that be an enemies to lovers, a friends to lovers, or a forbidden. Whatever it is in any genre, specifically romance I'm talking about right now, I would try and find that exact trope that you like in a fantasy book. Once you've got that sorted, then I would then go and find that trope within a YA book, find recommendations either through BookTok, BookTube, anywhere that you usually find your recommendations, whether that's at a local library, ask them. Putting yourself in the YA section will alleviate any stress of you having to go into a high fantasy situation where you are following 10 plus characters and trying to run along with all of their lives and figure out how they're connected and who you need to trust. It's a lot when you get into the higher stakes fantasy, so starting out with YA will take away that. You will be focusing mostly on like a minimal amount of characters and maybe a few side characters, but the main characters that you focus on will be a shorter group than your high fantasy books. Myself coming from a romance to a fantasy, I just knew I needed that romance element, and preferably an enemies to lovers, because once you do read a true enemies to lovers, it'll change your life. I need a dagger to the neck. I need them to actually want to hurt each other. That's the true enemies to lovers. I do have another tip, which this is probably the most important tip of all of them that I'm going to give you, is that it is okay to be confused. And I want to make sure I preface this by saying I have read so many fantasy books where I'm 100 pages in and nothing makes sense to me yet. And then I get 20 pages along and I'm at page 125 and suddenly it all clicks. Everything that I've read up until that point makes sense, and I start remembering things and I slowly build up my knowledge of this new world that I'm reading. So yes, I do want to say it is okay to be confused. It is absolutely normal. Sometimes it can take between 50 up to 150 pages because there is just so much information being compacted into your head from what you're reading. It's overwhelming almost, that you just think that you're like, what is going on? But it's okay, just keep pushing through. All of a sudden one time you will read a chapter and you'll go, oh, that's what that is. And then, oh, that's what that word means. It just all slowly comes together and you start to feel like, it's all making sense. Don't put too much pressure on yourself to make sure that you understand everything. I know some people like to take notes of certain things while they're reading. Me personally, I don't. I just sort of wing it. If that helps you, maybe try to take some notes down of certain characters, who they are, what relations they have. Those sorts of things can be very helpful sometimes. I usually just start out reading maybe first 150 pages without looking at the map, and then if we ever like travel to somewhere within the book, then I'll go like, oh, so where was I? And currently we were in this city and then we're moving to this place. I wouldn't really try and learn all of the other places unless it gets brought up in the book. That's probably my tip, because if you're sitting there trying to like learn all of the different places in the kingdom, it gets very confusing. So just learning where we are on the map for the first place of where we're starting out, and every time you move to a new place within the book, then I would go back to the map and have a look just like where you've traveled to. Being patient is key when reading fantasy, and yeah, definitely just take your time and make sure that you're reading things through thoroughly and not rushing things, because sometimes there will be key important parts of information within the first 150 pages that will probably come up later on down the line as to like why something's happening, or some certain power that people are meant to have, or magic or something along those lines that you just need to know. And it's very important to be very understanding of what information you're being fed, because it's probably to do with a part of a plot twist. And if you're like me and you do want to try and guess it, then yeah, you gotta key in with those things. Starting out, I would say to start with either a duology or a trilogy within the YA genre. Then you're not getting yourself involved in like a 60 book series. Some of these fantasy series are 10, 15, 20 books long, and they are still ongoing. So you don't want to get yourself wrapped up in a series like that to start with. You want to start with something that's already quite short, very sweet, and you know it's not going to be continuing on. Let's start with the first recommendations that I do have. So the first YA duology that I want to show you is probably a very popular one that's online. We do have the Divine Rivals duet by Rebecca Ross, Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows. This is a historical magical realism YA book. It does have a large subplot of romance in these, so if you are looking for an easy jump in where romance is definitely, you know, a larger part of the book, start with these. Iris and Roman probably have the most sweetest and tender romance that I have read in quite a long time, especially for a YA book. I just think so wholesome, like the most wholesome romance. But while they do have this wholesome romance, the fantasy world itself is very easy to understand, but it also does have a little bit of a darker element to it, because they are currently in the middle of a war, and the war that is going on is them fighting against the Drakari. I think that's how you pronounce it. Yeah, this is the thing with fantasy, you don't know if you're pronouncing things right, but in my head it sounds right. Her brother is currently in the war and has been sent off to war, and she is currently working at a, what are they called? Oh my god, I've had a brain fart. A news column? Yeah, a news column, like a news, she's a columnist, that's it. She writes columns within the local paper. Roman is, as the title would say, her rival at work. They have currently just gone into the workforce. They are 18 years old. Both of them have this rivalry going on between them. They are both the top writers within their workplace. They're trying to fight for the same position at work. And where the magical element comes in, it is a magical realism element, so there are only certain aspects of the world that have magic. That would be like, say if they go into a grocery store, they have a magical system set up for their groceries, or the typewriters that they use every day to speak to each other. So that's where they're able to send letters magically without actually physically having to send the letter off by post. Iris and Roman don't actually know that they are speaking to each other with these typewriters, so that is like where there's a secret identity thing that comes into this. Iris and Roman somehow end up sending a letter to each other. I can't really talk about book 2 too much without giving away the plot twist that happens at the end of this one. So they are a duet. There's no other books that will be in the series. They're super easy to read. The writing is so ethereal, it's magical. I loved it. Rebecca Ross just has like a beautiful way of putting words together, so I really appreciate her style of writing. I highly recommend these two. Next we have the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. So this is a trilogy. We do have 3 books, which is then the Ballad of Never After book 2, and we have A Curse for True Love as the final one. Yes, I do only have the hardback and the 2 paperbacks. I am distraught until the paperback comes out, but until then, yes, I know. It's a mess. Starting out with this trilogy, you do meet Evangeline and Jax. Evangeline makes a deal with Jax, who is the Prince of Hearts. He is one of the Fates, and the Fates are a magical being who have power, and they have the power to provide people with what they want. That being said, sometimes fates don't always put your best interest first, so you may not always get what you want specifically unless you are very smart with your wording. Evangeline has made a deal to do something which I'm not going to give away, and in return Jax has asked for her to give 3 kisses of his choice. So that would mean that she has a little mark on her to say that she has 3 kisses, and that at any time Jax will be able to direct her to say, you need to kiss this person, and she has to do it, otherwise he can do something in retaliation for her not following through with the request, even though he has granted her the wish that she wanted. Jax sort of takes advantage of her and tries to mess with her life a little bit, and yeah, the story goes on from there. It is a little bit of a slow start with this one because obviously you're getting to learn the world and the world building, but then as soon as you get into book 2 and 3, things move very quickly. The thing about Stephanie Garber's writing is that her writing style is too easy, to the point where I finished 2 of these books in one day. It's such an easy and quick read, so fast paced once you get to book 2 and 3. There is so much going on that you you can't really look away because you just you love all the characters, you love the world, and just the plot in general is so much fun. I do have a bit of controversial opinions about book 3, some things that didn't quite hit for me, but I would still recommend the series because so many people have loved all 3 books. Overall, the series and the characters are so lovable and just very easy and quick to get into. Next, we have the first book as a series. So this series, I do believe is going to be a trilogy, but we haven't got the other books just yet. And there is actually a novella coming out, probably I think maybe next month. I can't really remember, but there is a novella coming, and then the second book in the series is coming out shortly after that. And that is going to be Reckless. Powerless is I would say enemies to lovers, but I wouldn't actually say that it's enemies to lovers because you do get a dual POV in this book, but that sort of can deter you from like the enemies to lovers. If we had a single POV, I would say that it is an enemies to lovers. But we got to read into Kai's mind very easily in the dual POV, so we could see that he was starting to like her before they have actually even kissed. So I wouldn't say this is enemies to lovers. Maybe I would say it's more like rivals to lovers. Usually in fantasy books, you are put into worlds where magic has been taken away from the kingdom because the kings are very selfish. And with this one, it's actually the complete opposite. So if you don't have powers, that's when you are banished from the kingdom. So only the elites of the elite can be around. And that makes it a little bit more interesting, I think, because it's just a little bit more fun. Hayden, who has our main character, she is actually an ordinary. She has no powers at all, and she's trying to survive within all of the elites, and she has to fake a power and to pose as a psychic. That is her power that she is pretending to have. Somehow she ends up getting involved in the Purging Trials, which is a trial that the kingdom run, and that then puts her in the physical palace of the kingdom, where she is then running against the trials, and now she's currently around the elite of the elites, trying to make sure that she doesn't mess up and get herself exiled. All of the opponents have very true and very well-known powers that she has seen and saw that can be very lethal and deadly. She makes an alliance almost with the prince, and the prince is sort of helping her train, and he has taken a bit of a liking to her and trying to get her through. I really enjoyed this. The trials, the interviews, the balls, everything like that is very Hunger Game vibes, and I know everyone says this about this book, but it truly was so much fun. And then the plot twist at the end made me so much more excited for book 2. I cannot wait. I think that twist was well needed because of the way that this book has started. When I was first starting this, I thought, where is this going to go? Because there's not much that can happen from here. But once that plot twist happened, it's made it a little bit more interesting. The banter is elite in here. So good. You will love Kai. He is probably one of the best fantasy book boyfriends out there. Highly recommend. So those would be my YA recommendations for you to start out with. Moving into some of my adult recommendations, I'm going to try and run through these a little bit more quickly because I've realized how long I've been talking and I need to move along. We do have books for the Crowns of Naxia series, so I do want to explain, I have only read these 2 books, and there is a novella between, but there is actually a 4th book that is involved, but it's like a separate part, like almost a standalone in this series. So I just wanted to mention that, but I've not read that book yet. So I'm just going to be talking about these ones for now. We do start out with The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent, and then go into The Ashes and the Starcursed King as the second main. And then the novella is The Six Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent as well. I will not be giving too much of a description about the remaining books, but I will just give a bit of a description about the first book. We are put into a vampire adult fantasy. So adult fantasy is now going to include a bit of spice in the books. The YA obviously does not. Araya has been captured by the Nightborn King as a child. She is actually a human, and he has taken her in to become basically his daughter, his like a little pet almost, that he is training up in order to fight vampires. Her whole life has been trained up basically to be in the Kajari. I think that is how you pronounce it. It is like an event that happens every so many years that is allowing her to gain power from the Queen of Death herself. The goddess of death, should I say, not the queen of death. And yeah, if she wins the trials against all these vampires, she gets one wish and she will grant it for her. Along the way, she does meet Rain. Rain is a vampire. They aren't getting off on the best of terms. She does think that he is out to get her. Obviously, being a vampire, she cannot trust anybody. That is what her dad has told her. He starts to take a bit of a liking, starts to help her a bit, and they are sort of teamed up as well in some parts of it. One thing about Rain is that he's actually her father's enemy and he is out to take the throne. She knows that from the start, and yeah, they have to make an unfortunate alliance together. That is where the book starts. There is a plot twist that happens, then the book ends. It does go into the novella. The novella actually follows a different story of two different characters, and they are actually going through something completely different. It is against the timeline, I believe the exact same time as what this book is, and then once it finishes, it then moves into this book, which is then where you'll meet those characters within here. So yeah, it just gives a bit of background as to what but it is a very good novella. I do recommend reading it. I love this series so much. It is a 5-star series for me. I love all the characters. The banter was so funny. The spice was great. I just love a good vampire. Honestly, I think it's like the Damon Salvatore. Like I can't. It's the Damons, the Klauses. Yeah, I'm not a Stefan girly. Yeah, good vampires. I love a good vampire. We do have the Shepherd King's duology, which is One Dark Window and the Two Twisted Crowns books. They are by Rachel Gillig. It is a dark gothic romantasy. You do get like the very mysterious and very gruesome-y feeling to it when you're like, it's just very eerie almost. The magic system within these books as well is so creative. It is almost like based off tarot cards. You have like a card system within here, and if you hold a certain card you can have certain powers, and if you have certain cards together it can also mean different powers as well. So it is very cool, very unique, and I think if you are wanting to read something where the magic system is a little bit more complex, this is where it does start a little bit more complex, but definitely not the hardest thing to understand. So I wouldn't be too scared going into this. A little bit of a rundown of like what happens is this book is based around Elspeth. Elspeth has a monster within her head. It is called the Nightmare. It is a magical being that has now trapped itself within her. She runs into a highwayman one night and they team up together so that they can get all the cards together that they need to get together in order to get rid of the fog that's in their town, stop the fog from infecting people, and that they can try and get rid of all of the issues that they're having within their kingdom. Along the way, they are working together. She does start to have a bit of a romance with this highwayman, but the most important part of the story that you do get told on the back of the book, and it is made reference to quite early on, he used to only show up here and there and say certain things, but as time is going on, he is starting to talk more and more once she gets into danger more and more. So he is starting to help her out, gives her certain powers in certain situations for survival instincts. That is where the story and the plot start to begin. It is very beautiful, it is very dark, it's very mysterious, and you'll love the characters. The spice is great as well for this. As much as I don't completely love the male main character, he's not my favorite fantasy male main character. The Nightmare in this is so funny. He is so hilarious. I think he's probably one of the best characters in here. Yeah, I highly recommend this duology. Obviously can't give away too much of this without spoiling this book, so very well known for a reason. Highly recommend it. Next is a standalone book. It is a current release, only came out at the start of this month. It is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This is my ARC version. That is what the cover should look like. It is a standalone, so I don't know if we will be getting more in the series because we do have other characters in here which could have other books, but so far this is the only one that's been announced. It's not said that it's part of a series, so there could be a separate standalone. Bride is an Omegaverse fantasy book which is following werewolves and vampires. Omegaverse is where they have like the alpha, beta. Lo is the ruler of his pack. He is the alpha of his little werewolf community. Misery is actually the daughter of the vampire councilman who has actually arranged a marriage for her to be sent off to Lo in the wolf territory. She doesn't have a good relationship with her family as she has been sent away to humans previously, and this is now the second time she's been sent away. From there, she starts to try and gain information to send back to her family, recover this relationship that they have between them, to see if there is some way that they can resolve the animosity that the vampires and werewolves have. The romance in this is very Ali Hazelwood-esque. If you love Ali Hazelwood, you are going to love this book. Definitely a great starting point to getting into fantasy. if you are a romance girly, especially an Ali Hazelwood romance girly. Mainly romance with a splash of fantasy. So I would say the world building is not the greatest. It is very minimal, very basic. If you want to just see if you like the style of this sort of book, definitely start here. And obviously being a standalone, you don't have to read multiple books. It is short, sweet. I think it's just over 400 pages, just under 400. It's about 397. The characters are lovable. It is very spicy, very like lots of tension involved. Even the plot is so well put together in this that you're not bored at all. The combination of vampires and werewolves together was okay. It wasn't my favorite fantasy book, but I did really enjoy the romance aspect of it. So I did want to throw it in there because if you are an Ali Hazelwood fan, you probably will love this, and it's probably a good introduction to a tiny bit of fantasy. Next, we have the Kingdom of the Wicked series. It is a trilogy, and then the trilogy also then moves into a standalone book, Throne of the Fallen, which follows a different Sin brother. So explaining that, we do get the first trilogy. So we do get the Kingdom of the Wicked, Kingdom of the Curse, and Kingdom of the Feared. Kingdom of the Wicked starts with the two twin sisters. They are very close. They are actually witches. One night, one of them is brutally, and she actually does find her sister. She needs to get vengeance on what's actually happened, so she decides to use some dark magic. Unfortunately, she does meet the Prince Wrath. Prince is one of the princes of hell. There are 7 kingdoms within the hell genre, and they are all brothers who actually run a certain kingdom within that realm. She ends up finding herself in a new world and having to deal with Wrath, and Wrath is trying to help her get the vengeance. Wrath is claiming to be on her side to try and help her, but obviously there is a little bit of reluctance in making sure that she trusts him, and the story follows along from there. It is a long, twisted tale of them going through different realms, meeting different people, them figuring out who they need to trust, and yeah, it is a love story along the way. Then going into Throne of the Fallen, Kerry actually then went from having that as a trilogy to then doing standalone books for all of the princes. I think that's just to tighten down the stories for all of the princes. It just makes it a little bit more quicker, I think, but yes, we do have actually a standalone for the Prince of Envy and Camilla. I loved this so much more than the Kingdom of the Wicked series, but you do need to read the Kingdom of the Wicked series to understand this one. Technically, actually, you could still read this as a standalone. It does explain quite a bit, but to understand the different worlds in a lot more detail, I would recommend still reading the Kingdom of the Wicked series. This was spicy, it was funny, it was hilarious. The Prince of Envy is actually being put into a game, and Camilla is somehow involved within that game because she is actually a local artist, and her artwork has been involved in some of the riddles that are unfolding. She's stuck between helping a certain friend of hers who has power and is involved within the same game, but also helping the Prince of Envy, who's actually made a bit of a bargain with her to say that he would help get certain things for her. In return, she needs to paint a certain painting. There is something about the banter in this book that I loved specifically. I think that their relationship was probably my favorite of the princes so far, and you do get a sneak peek into a few of the other princes again throughout this book. Kerry just keeps sprinkling in a few of the other princes, and I just cannot wait for their books because they are just so funny, especially the Prince of Lust and the Prince of Pride. They are my 2 that I'm dying to read. This was definitely a high up there book. Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling was one of my top reads from last year. I absolutely fell in love with this entire series. It is going to be a 4-book series, I believe, from my memory, but it is being republished again this year, and the second book doesn't come out till 2025, so we do have to wait for it. Princess Eowyn has had her dragons taken away from her by her father. Her father has actually kept her a prisoner her whole life because she does have the power over the dragons. She does escape and then starts her own kingdom and has slowly been building up the power in order to go back to her father's kingdom to take back her dragons, which he held prisoner. In order to do that, she has made an alliance with one of the other kingdoms, and that kingdom's commander is like the one she's communicating with the most. Oh my god, that got really bright. And that would be Caden. So Caden is the male main character. They have a reluctant alliance. They have to train together. They are trying to build up an army and then go in to take back the dragons, which he knows that is going to change everything, and they can finally take down her father. That's where it starts. The tension in this book, the spice, the found family in this, I loved it. You'll love every single one of the characters. There are like 5 main characters, I would say, in this book. But Kate and Ellen are the main ones, and the other 3 would probably be like the very prominent in the story, and I do love them. They are very lovable characters. You do get like the world building, the politics, the laws there is, and in them just building their vengeance together, their hatred together for her father, it's just so satisfying to know that they're going to take him down. He is just a horrible man. If I could recommend one book out of all these books, if you can read a adult fantasy book, highly recommend it. I still think about this book all the time. One of my favorites. Another series that I've started but haven't finished, I do want to recommend obviously, is the Throne of Glass series, but yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail about that because I've not quite finished it, and I want to see if because right now I'm only at book 3 and I'm just starting book 4. And then obviously the ACOTAR series, which I do recommend reading before starting Throne of Glass. I've read all of those books and I highly recommend it. It is definitely like the gateway drug into fantasy. If you want to start there, it is probably one of the best series to start with. Literally the gateway drug of fantasy. They are all my recommendations. I'm going to go through some of the books that are on my TBR which are upcoming. So I do have The Daughter and the Moon Goddess and The Heart of Sun Warrior, which are a duology. I actually don't know anything else about these. I've just been recommended them to me by some of the people at my local Waterstones. I've just heard good things and the covers are stunning, so yeah, I picked them up. The Book of Azrael, I've seen this all over TikTok. I, again, don't really know anything else about these books. I just get one quote off TikTok and I buy it, so here we are. This trilogy is one that I booked from my local Costco. They were on sale for like £12 for the 3 of them and I had to buy them. I've never read a V.E. Schwab book, but this series is one of her older series, I believe. It is The Darker Shades of Magic. I've just heard good things. That's really it. I've not really read her work, but I've heard that she's like one of people's like all-time favorite authors. So I bought this because it was cheap, and yeah, it's still sitting on my shelf, but I'm gonna read it. A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. I've heard this is a YA like folk fantasy, and I've heard that the writing is absolutely beautiful. Feybound, this is a current release that has just come out. I purchased it maybe a couple weeks ago. All I know is that it's a romantic fantasy, so yeah. Once I heard romance and fantasy, I was like, yeah, I'll get that. I've seen Destiny and Rachel online recommend this series. I believe it is a duology with a novella between. It is Foul Lady Fortune by Chloe Gong. I've not read any of Chloe Gong's other books, but once they said that they really enjoyed it and they gave it 4 stars, I had to pick it up, and I just think that the cover's beautiful, so yeah, I grabbed it. This one was recommended by a colleague at work. It is Emily Wells' Encyclopedia of Fairies. Again, Rachel has raved about this book a lot and I had to pick it up. It is a duology as well. The second book has just come out in hardback, so I may put this off reading until the other book comes out in paperback, and then I could get both in paperback, but yeah, excited to read this. 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. I bought it purely because of the cover. I know nothing else about it. Common occurrence. The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I did buy 2 books of Olivia Blake's at once, but I ended up not liking her other books, so it has really put me off reading this book. I don't know, I put it up on the screen, I can't remember the name, but I didn't like it and I ended up DNFing it, tried it again, and it was just a bit too pretentious for me, so I got rid of it, and that's what's really putting me off reading this. Belladonna, I've bought this because it was going on the rounds of TikTok and I had to join in, so I bought the book. I haven't read it yet, but I saw Destiny, one of my mutuals, say that she read it recently and she started putting some quotes online, and I was like, I need to pick that up like sooner than later because this has been on my shelf for so long and I just don't know why I've not picked it up. And then I saw the romance quotes and I was like, I need to pick that up now. I'm about to drop every other book that I've got right now and just pick that up. I've been holding myself back. I need to read my TBR and then I'll read it, but why haven't I read this sooner? Next is The Bride of the Shadow King. This is a book that I literally picked off the shelf. No one has recommended it to me. I went and checked the reviews on Goodreads and apparently it's not that great. So yeah, I'm gonna have to just see how this one goes. I read it on the back and it said that sister gets married off to the Shadow King. It's an arranged marriage, but then once they are engaged and about to be married, they start to have eyes for each other, and I thought the forbiddenness was exactly what I needed. The next one is a scary book. It is The Orange of the Priory Tree. This is a true hardcore high fantasy, and it is a thick book, and there'll be multiple characters, lots of character development. It scares the shit out of me, but I'm gonna do it one day. I'm gonna be a true fantasy girly and read this. So those are all my books on my TBR. I'm gonna have to put all of these books back on my shelf, which I hope any of my tips and tricks or any of my recommendations may help you with starting out in fantasy. It is a scary place to start. I know this genre is not for everyone. Once you do find the right book and the right type of fantasy for you, it can be so addicting. I really hope that you can enjoy those pleasures of the fantasy world as much as I do, because it truly is such an escapism and it is worth every second of being confused at the start of the book. I'm going to love you and leave you. If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure you like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.